You're on camera.
Cameras.
And it's so good evening, everybody. Good evening. Shalom, shalom. Hey, Liz. Can people hear me when I speak like this, or should I speak like this? Like that? Okay. Okay, very well. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all. Thanks for coming. This is my dad.
I have the honor.
Yes, I have the honor. I wanted to give some of you know a little bit about him, and some of you I assume don't know all that much. And I wanted to give a little bit of context to where he arrives at where he is today in terms of his activist and political work, primarily. Also to situate this evening within the context of the war happening in Gaza right now, right? Because you're going to hear less about Gaza this evening and more about the West Bank, which is a slightly different beast. Actually, a very different and very much related beast. So I'll say that how shall I say this? One of the things, the West Bank, one of the differences between what's happening right now in the West Bank and what's happening in Gaza is that we're all, and we being everybody here, everybody there, pretty much everybody everywhere, there's a large degree of confusion as to, and ambiguity at least, in terms of what's right and what's wrong, and how to think about it, and should we this or should we not? And there's a great degree of ambiguity, even though everybody agrees that there's a lot of moral wrongs happening and have happened all over the place. The West Bank, for me, this is the alarm from Ezzy's eye drops. That's funny. So the West Bank and the stuff that you're going to hear from my dad, which may not be so easy to hear, it's especially in Area C, which I don't know how much people know or don't know, but it's a part of the West Bank. It's a part of the Palestinian Authority. That there's three areas in the Palestinian Authority. Area A is under Palestinian control, full Palestinian control of the cities. Area B is a little mixed, and Area C is ultimately under Israeli control. And the vast majority of the Palestinian Authority is Area C, and Area C is very problematic, and that's most of where I should what? Speak louder. That's where a lot of the stuff happens, and it's less ambiguous. You're going to hear stories that you're not going to be wondering, oh, what is the right thing to do in a lot of them. You're going to see things pretty clearly as pretty bad, really bad things that are kind of undeniably, bad things. And this was my political, these places are the places in which I became an activist. This is where I learned with my dad in places like Susia and other places, with going around with Ezra Nawi, if there are people here who know who that was, and just really seeing these pretty nasty expressions of what human beings can do. So I say that in part to keep that in mind, right? So that's piece number one. Is this is kind of rough territory. It's not going to look like maybe this is okay and maybe this isn't. Yeah. Whereas in Gaza, you may have all kinds of different opinions. And the other thing that I want to tell you by means of introduction is that, my dad came to Israel. I heard, was it today or yesterday, when he was clarifying that he came to Israel in 1967, not out of a tremendous Zionist, he said, not out of a tremendous Zionist draw, but just fell in love with the Hebrew language, is how he described it. But I actually don't entirely believe him. I actually think there was a very strong Zionist, he felt that story very strongly through his mother, my grandmother Dina, and all kinds of other pieces, like the story we read yesterday and this morning, things like that. But he came there with a tremendous degree of excitement and love. Fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it started there. And I'm saying this because there have been in the past moments in which I bring him to speak somewhere, I invite him to speak, and he scares everybody and they think he's an anti-Semite or something. Because he speaks his truth. He's not, you'll see, he doesn't, and it can be off-putting, especially in days like this, in which the entire notion of the state of Israel is suddenly on shaky grounds, or people are saying all kinds of different, they're challenging that. And so I felt it necessary to give that introduction. There's, and since 1967, he's been living there, living in Jerusalem, in the house where I grew up. Both my brothers still live there, just outside of Jerusalem, and most of your grandkids. And once a week he gets up and he goes out into the territories. This has been happening for like 25 years or so, since the creation of this, that he was a part of, this organization called Ta'ayush, which means living together, which is a partnership between Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians. And Eric has also been out with my dad on these expeditions into the West Bank, and I wanted to ask her to quickly describe one of these little expeditions or something.
Sure.
This is my wife, Erica, for those of you who don't know.
I'm just going to say really quickly what I think is important. I need to go in there. You don't need to see me. Shalom. I wanted to just say, first of all, I would say just a quick thing about my father-in-law, which is I've had a lot of guests at my house over the years. And, if you've met my parents, they're wonderful, but then they're going to watch this. They complain here and there. This is a person who never complains. I'm like, here's a little piece of toast. And he's like, it's wonderful. Okay, so I just want to put that in the context. This isn't the biggest kvetch you ever met. This is somebody who appreciates things and appreciates people. And so also just a little bit of context when you hear his descriptions. I thought that was maybe important. And the other just small important thing I wanted to share is that, so we've gone out together, and I'll get woken up in the morning at like 4:30 in the morning. And yes, at 4:30 in the morning, and it's dark outside. And we're gonna get into some, where he wakes me up and he's made me a lunch already, and he made me a coffee, and we're like, it's 5 in the morning, and we're waiting on some street corner for someone to come by and pick us up and drive us to the Jordan Valley so that we can get there before sunrise and accompany shepherds so that they aren't attacked by settlers. He'll describe this, but the part that seemed important to me for you to know is it's really hot. And it's really tiring. And sometimes we get home at 3 in the afternoon. And I'm doing this once a year in some kind of weird, relationship with my own head and like kind of like activist tourism kind of thing, where to make myself feel better, whatever it is I'm doing in my own head. He's doing it every single week, and he's giving his time every single week. And I say that because we're also living in a time of opinions, and very quick opinions. And I think to think about those 6 or 7 hours in the heat, doing this kind of like very beautiful but sometimes tedious accompaniment, which is essentially invisible to the outside world. For the purpose of just being there, I wanted you to imagine that, so that when you hear opinions or you hear observations, you can know that they're sitting on top of, you know, this kind of huge hill of hours of time, which is really like all we have to give. And so I just thought that if you could imagine that, that might help to understand where these observations and analyses come from. Anything else, sir?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, this is David Shulman, everybody. Oh, I will say, David will speak for, I don't know, however long he speaks, and then we'll open it for questions, and we can, so feel free to note those questions when you go.
Thank you, Misha and Erica. And let me say I'm really happy to be here. It's lovely to be here. Over these last few years, I've acquired some acquaintance with the community of the new Shul. It means a lot to me. I know some of the faces here pretty well, some from our Zoom meetings. I wanted to say to Erica, I mean, first of all, thank you. It's an unusual experience to be introduced both by my son and my beloved daughter-in-law. It's the first time that's ever happened, actually. It's great. But I did want to tell you that if you were to ask Eileen, my wife Eileen, she might say that this idea that I never complain is not entirely true. You know? I complain.
So good to know you're human.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be speaking tonight about the situation on the West Bank today in the context of the war. And there'll be a little historical background, but I'm not going to start with the background. I'm going to start with a scene from now, just to give you some sense of what it's like today on the West Bank. In general, I like to talk about things that I've actually seen myself, or heard it firsthand in any case, in a place, a people, a village that I actually know without any kind of indirect information, but something that I've experienced myself. So it'll be like that tonight. That's what I'm going to talk about. We can say a few things about Gaza if you like, maybe in the Q&A later. And I do have something to say, maybe as a preliminary remark about that. But I'm going to generally be speaking about what I've seen on the West Bank and what the situation there is like today. And I'm going to try to give you some sense of, what that reality is today. And I can tell you, it's a grim reality. I'm really sorry. I hope I'm not going to depress you for the next few days, but it's a really tough situation. It's been tough since I've been active there, which is 20-some years. It's been tough all along, but now it's exponentially tough. The situation has deteriorated immensely.
Air conditioning.
Oh, I see. You can't hear? Oh.
Want to bring a chair? There's also some spots up here.
I don't think it'll help if I speak even. Yeah, it does? Okay, all right, I'll do my best. So here, let's imagine a village. It's going to be in the South Hebron Hills. That's the southernmost part of the occupied territories, the occupied West Bank. So these villages, they're inhabited by shepherds or maybe small-scale farmers, or it could be a combination of those two things. They could have a little farming on the side in order to raise, let's say, a little barley or wheat to feed the sheep and goats. But they're sedentary. That is, they're not nomadic like pastoralists. These are people who've been sitting on the land in these villages for a very long time, in some cases since time immemorial, that is, since biblical times, or even before biblical times. Actually, there are people inhabiting these same villages. These, generally speaking, these are ordinary, decent human beings, peaceful. Their security record almost blank. With one exception that I could tell you about, I don't think they've ever had any real accusations of any kind of violence or being part of any of the Palestinian organizations, nothing like that. These are simple shepherds. They're living a kind of biblical lifestyle, as you'll hear in a moment. I want to describe the village that you're going to, okay, so I have in my mind the village of Susia, but it could be many other such places. They tend to live in these small hamlets. So you can imagine a place where there's, let's say there are 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 tents, big tents, big canvas tents. There might be a few shacks made of metal, aluminum, something like that. Those are going to be the homes, and there will be sheep pens and goat pens, and they will be situated in a ravishingly beautiful landscape. That's kind of important to me that you should know. It's really, really beautiful. We're talking about this South Hebron Hills, so these are kind of rocky, elevated hills. They're full of, thorns and wildflowers in the spring. You have because it's high, it's about 700 meters high, I guess, down there. So you usually have a vista of miles. You can see for miles. You see these beautiful kind of rolling hills there. They change color in the course of the day. In the morning, they're kind of bright golden as the sun comes up, and then they become brown, a kind of deep, beautiful brown, mixed with the green of the thorns and the other vegetation that is there in the trees. But in the late afternoon, as the sun begins to decline, they turn purple. It's the most amazing thing. It's kind of this deep purple blue kind of landscape. The sight of the shepherds out on these hills with their sheep and their goats, it's been 20-some years, but it never ceases to move me. It's a very, very beautiful kind of life. Or I should say it would be a beautiful kind of life if they could actually live it without being tormented by Israeli settlers who have been planted in their midst. So I'll come back and tell you a little bit more about who these settlers are. But first I want you to imagine something that is happening right now, even as we talk, almost certainly, as we're sitting here talking. So that's nighttime in Israel, right? What is it? It's 7 hours. So that means it's about 3 in the morning. That's the favored time for these Israeli settlers from the outposts. It's a particular kind of settler. I'll describe them to you and try to penetrate into their inner world in a minute or two. But just imagine that it's 3 o'clock in the morning and suddenly a group of, several, maybe many armed Israeli settlers invade the village. It could be as few as 3 or 4 or 5. It could be as many as 50. And 20 is not unusual these days. And they're armed. Every single one of them is armed. They're carrying M16 submachine guns, courtesy of our Minister for Internal Security, Ben-Gvir, who has been distributing literally thousands of guns, basically without any control, registration, nothing. Anybody who wants a gun, and especially on the West Bank settlers, he just gives them the guns. So they're carrying these M16s. But they also usually have pistols, and sometimes they have butcher knives. It's quite common that any single one of them might have all 3 of these. It's a little scary, not simply because they're armed, but some of them are very young. They're like adolescents. They might be 16 or 17 or 18. They're wearing army uniforms these days, even though they're not part of the army. But now they've got these uniforms that the army has given them. And they like to pretend to be soldiers, but they're pretend soldiers. They're not real soldiers. Most of them. The vast majority are like that. And many of them have not been trained to use these weapons. So you can imagine that's even more scary. You get a 16-year-old guy who's never shot an M16 and they're coming into a village and they start shooting, which is what usually happens. I mean, it's really terrifying. So they come into the village. Let's say there are 20 of them. And they may go from house to house, or they might concentrate on a single compound or house initially. They might split up into subgroups and go, take one tent, one shack, one house, and some other group, and the other ones. As I said, they'll be shooting. They'll be shooting into the air. They might be shooting in the direction of the sheep pens. They like to kill the sheep. And they might shoot at human beings. That's, there have been rather a lot of simple Palestinian shepherds and farmers who over the last weeks have been killed by these settlers. I know personally of about 10 cases like that, but I think there are probably many more. You should know that a settler, like this kind of settler, these settlers from the outposts, if they shoot and kill a Palestinian or wound him, nothing will happen to him. Nothing. They are above the law. The law doesn't exist. Israeli law has no purchase in the South Hebron Hills or the Jordan Valley or basically anywhere in the West Bank. They won't be arrested, they won't be detained, they won't be brought to trial, nothing like that. Even though the army undoubtedly knows who these people are. They know. It's not as if they don't know. The security services know these people. But they don't arrest them, and in some cases, actually quite often now, the soldiers support them actively. That is, they take part in this raid, or you could maybe call it a pogrom. I think that's the right word for it. And the soldiers will be part of it too. My grand uncle, my grandmother, one of the most beloved and benevolent figures in my life, she was born in the Ukraine, in a place called Mykolaiv. Not the Mykolaiv you might have read about in the papers. There are two Mykolaivs. This one is to the west. She grew up there, and there was a pogrom in the village. These Cossacks came in, and her brother, he was 17 years old, he tried to hide from them in some body of water, some little pool or something like that, and he drowned. He was 17. So I don't use the word pogrom lightly, really. Anyway, let's go back to imagine what is happening in the course of this raid. They'll come into the village, they'll come into the houses as if they own the houses. Once they're inside the house, first of all, they like to beat up anybody who's there. They're extremely violent, these people. It's not an exaggeration, believe me, they're extremely violent. The young ones, some are a little older now. I've known some of these settlers, known them in a sense for years. They used to be like 16 and 17, now they're like 25, 26, something. They're older a little bit now, some of them. They'll beat up people. They'll break anything breakable, like the door, like the windows, like the cooking vessels, like the chairs, like the sofas. They might set fire to the house, common thing. They, of course, I forgot to tell you that they're screaming and yelling and shouting as they come in. They're shouting curses and threats, above all threats. And we know the text of these threats because they've been reported in village after village. Many villages have now heard these threats. It's become like a kind of mantra or something that they've learned to say. So they say, you guys, you have 24 hours to leave, to clear out of here altogether, and if you're not gone in 24 hours, we'll be back and we'll kill all of you. Men, women, children, old people. We'll kill you all. That's what they say. And I'm not making it up. We've heard it, it's been documented and filmed. I mean, it's like there's no question that that's what they're saying. So it's a really scary moment. If there's food in the house, they'll throw it out. They might piss on it. They'll ruin whatever food is there. There happens to be a refrigerator, which is not always the case. These are very poor people. They're living like on the margin of survival. So, if there's food, they'll destroy it. And once they've finished with all of that, they might actually wreck the house or the tent completely. Once they've done that, they turn their attention to the water tanks. It's a desert area. It's really, really dry. You cannot live there without water. And these families usually have, water tanks that are like kind of raised on a sort of tower. Those tanks have been put in place by our activists. There's a group called Comet ME. They're amazing people, very gifted with engineering, techniques and all that. They're professional people. And over the last many years, they have been, let's say, upgrading the infrastructure, if you want to use a big word, in these villages. So that means they've put up these wind turbines to generate electricity. There's a film about these people. It's called The Wind Turbine. It's a beautiful film. I recommend it. You can probably find it on YouTube. They put up these wind turbines that generate electricity, and they've electrified the villages. I could tell you some stories about that. They were working initially undercover. They didn't want the soldiers to discover that they were there because they knew the soldiers would come and immediately destroy whatever they've done. But these water towers are also part of it, So these settlers will come in and they'll shoot holes in the water tanks, so all the water drips out. And then there are solar panels. Recently, most of these villages now have solar panels, So they'll knock down the wind turbine and smash it, and they'll shoot or just beat into these solar panels so that too is gone. So the village is going to be left with no power, no electricity, no television, which is actually something they need, and altogether it's a terrifying thing. And this can go on. It could be like it could be a short visit of, let's say, half an hour. It could also be 2 or 3 hours in which they stay in the village and they make sure that they're destroying everything they can. This is, I just said to you a minute ago, this is probably happening right now as I'm talking to you. Somewhere in the South Hebron Hills, in one of the villages that I know, very likely families whom I know and who have become friends over the years, close friends. It's happening there now. It could be happening in 2 or 3 or 4 places simultaneously. Sometimes these are coordinated attacks. Sometimes they're coordinated with the army. And as I said earlier, the soldiers tend to either contribute actively to this kind of destructive raid, or, in the best case, they'll just stand passively by and watch it. They're not going to make any attempt to stop it, Okay, we can take a moment to breathe after hearing this description. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. We've been keeping activists in these villages, not all of them, because there are quite a few of such villages, and we can't handle all of them, and we don't have enough people. But there's, let's say, 5 to 10 villages that we know are in acute danger of being evacuated, that is, of being driven out by these settlers because they can no longer hang on to it, and they have no viable life left, And if they can't graze their flocks, and that's the next thing that happens, is that they're unable to take their flocks out to graze because they're likely to encounter settlers or soldiers who tell them that they're not allowed to do this. I had a fresh report just from yesterday of a Palestinian shepherd who he wanted to plow his field. This is the time of year, the rains have come. Not a lot of rain, but there's some rain, you know. So the rains have come. So this is the time where normally they will plow the fields using this kind of archaic technology. Usually it's just like a sort of Stone Age plow, you know, something like that. It's not a mechanized thing in any way. The plow is pulled by a donkey. They plow the field and then they sow the seeds. You know, I've done it myself a few times. They even let me try to do it with the donkey. And after a while, I got the hang of it. It's not so simple to do it, by the way. And I, like Ezra Nawi, who Misha mentioned, I've developed a kind of keen, intimate friendship with donkeys. I really like them. Yeah, they're kind of wonderful. So anyway, this guy was just, 2 or 3 days ago, he went out with his donkey and with the plow to plow his own field. You have to understand this is their own land, they own this land. Actually, the entirety of the West Bank, all of it, every millimeter of it is Palestinian land, despite what the Israeli government might tell you, and we can go into the legal situation if you're interested. There's one possible exception to that. That's what's called the Etzion block, Gush Etzion, which was land was purchased by the Jews before the 1948 war. With that one exception, all the rest of the land in the West Bank is Palestinian. And a lot of it is privately owned and registered in the names of the owners. Can you hear me still in the back? Is it okay? All right, so this guy came out. As soon as he got out there was a settler waiting for him. He said, you can't plow and you can't sow your seeds. There's a war going on. You're not going to be able to do it this year. Go home. Well, not go home, actually. The settler took him at gunpoint to some army roadblock, which was several kilometers away. So this guy's an older man. Anyway, the first thing the army did was that they confiscated the plow. And then they kept this guy there for hours and hours, and they finally let him go. At the same time that was happening, in the next village nearby, just a couple of kilometers away, there the Palestinian shepherd had a tractor. That's a tremendous thing in the South Hebron Hills. You can't, in a way, like it's almost impossible to survive there unless you have a tractor. It's like a really basic part of your life. Anyway, the same, of course, the army confiscated the tractor. And I don't know what they did with it. Yeah, in the past, we've seen a lot of cases like that where a tractor has been confiscated. The army would park it in some military base, and then it would take usually months, could be 4, 5, 6 months until the owner recovered the tractor. That's just a long legal process, and they're usually fined also for having had the tractor confiscated. Fine means like maybe something in the range of 4,000 to 10,000 Israeli shekels. That's a huge amount of money for these people. You have to imagine, these are people living on the margin. They have no savings. There's no such thing. There's no savings. They live hand to mouth. And if they're not allowed to plow their land, like for one season, like now, like it's just happened 2 days ago to this guy I was telling you about, then their very survival is put into question. So just to sum this little bit of it up, and then I want to give you a little background about the settlers. Let me just say, these are people who are living in terror. I've been sleeping overnight in some of these villages, and the activists in this small group I mentioned, we have people there 24/7. It's not easy to keep that bunch of people in these villages and to move them from one to another. My very close friend, Yigal Brono, he was there for 72 hours in the same area. South Hebron Hills just a couple of weeks ago. 72 hours, that means he slept there 3 nights, and the nights are the terrifying times. And the days are also terrifying, but the nights are particularly bad. And he said there was never a dull moment. They were running around, being rushed around from one place to another, wherever there was an attack, and there are attacks all the time, every day. So they're living in a state of terror. And when I was staying in Susia, I mean, it was pathetic to see it. I mean, these are tough people, you know. They're peasant farmers and shepherds. They're tough people. They're surviving in very difficult conditions. Even before there were settlers there, it wasn't so easy. But they're now, you know, the night that I was there, every little thing, every little noise, if a car passes on the road somewhere near the village, you know, they immediately lock themselves into their houses in just sheer terror. If there's a light in the valley, say 200, 300 meters away, so what is that light? Maybe these are settlers with a flashlight coming to raid them, and so they're like living in a state of terror. And you have to understand, it's really important that you understand that they have no recourse, no legal recourse. The Israeli courts no longer are of any use for cases like this. They have no rights. They have zero rights. You know, I was once just tell you an anecdote. Some years ago, I was in one of these places, and we were out with the shepherds. This is in the better times, not what's happening now. Anyway, we were out with these shepherds, and the soldiers turned up, and as they almost always do, they produced a written order called a closed military zone order. A closed military zone means, in practice, that the actual owners of those grazing grounds or agricultural grounds are no longer allowed to get any access to them. But settlers who have stolen these lands, they have free access all the time. It's called, there's a technical term for that, it's called lands in dispute. That's the bureaucratic word for it that the civil administration uses. That's the army unit that is in charge of the occupation. So we were out with these shepherds, you know. The soldiers came, they declared it a closed military zone. The shepherds did not want to get arrested, so they went deeper into the desert. We followed them. We always take our lead from them. We're not going to force them at any moment to do something they don't want to do or that could endanger them. Although, of course, if they were prepared to put up a stand and get arrested, we would be arrested with them. We would make sure that we were arrested with them, because once they're in the system, then they're like at the mercy of this really ruthless bureaucratic and military system, and you have to go there and try to protect them as best you can. Anyway, they went into the desert, and we followed them, and then these 2 soldiers, young soldiers, came by. And they came by because they were interested in us, because that is the Israeli activists, you know, they can't figure it out. What are we doing? We're like traitors. We're fraternizing with the enemy. We're helping these Palestinians. It's as if we dropped from the moon, or even farther away than the moon, if at all possible. So they were kind of curious. These are young guys. They're like maybe 18 years old, 19, soldiers with their guns and all that stuff, you know. So they came by because they said they wanted to talk to us. So we said, okay, I'd be happy to talk to you. I have no problem talking to the soldiers or to the settlers. There's some activists don't like to do that, but I like to talk. I think it could even be important in some ways, although not usually immediately important. But anyway, these 2 guys, they said, you know, well, what do you think you're doing here? So we say to them, I said to them, you know, what you've just done is illegal. It's illegal according to the Israeli Supreme Court. There was a ruling of the Israeli Supreme Court in 2004 saying that it's illegal for the army to impose a closed military zone. In any case, it's illegal, but especially it's illegal if it means preventing access to grazing grounds or agricultural grounds of the Palestinians, you know. And the military advisor of the army in the West Bank adopted this ruling and issued a ruling to all the units and all that stuff. So, I usually carry in my knapsack a copy of this ruling. So we say to them, what you just did, it's like, it's against the law. It's like, this is the Supreme Court said this, you're not allowed to do this. So they say to me, well, what do you mean? They said, we're here to defend democracy. That's what they said to me. So I said, well, okay, you're here to defend democracy, so let's think about it for a minute. I say to these guys, democracy, usually people get to vote, right? I mean, one of the basic things is that they should have elections, they should be able to vote for somebody. So who do you think these people can vote for? So then there's like this awkward moment of silence because this guy's just like a new thought. These are you have to understand, these are people who were born into the occupation. They've never known any other reality. They think this is Israel. This is part of Israel as far as they're concerned. So, they think for a few minutes, can't figure it out. So they say to me, there must be somebody they can vote for. They said, that's the nature of it. Okay, so that's the overall basic picture. I want to say a few words about the settlers. It's important for me to do this. See, not all the settlers fall into the category that I just described of these marauding thugs. It's by no means all the settlers. All of the settlements, including the older ones and the more recent outposts, I'll describe this in a second, all of them are illegal under international law. You would be very hard put to find any jurist anywhere in the world who would say that these are legal. It's, Israel's a signatory to the Rome 1994 Convention. It describes what is possible under conditions of warfare and occupation. So it's totally illegal to move your own population into an occupied zone that you've conquered. You might be holding on to that land for whatever reason, but you're not allowed to populate it with your own people. It's completely wrong. But under Israeli law, there is a distinction. Israeli law is not the same as international law. Under Israeli law, the older settlements, veteran settlements, they're legal because they were founded by decisions of the Israeli government, usually by the cabinet. Okay, so now there are three types of settlements, broadly speaking. I guess a lot of you know this. I'm gonna go through it quickly. There are basically three kinds of settlements. We're talking about a lot of people. Maybe by now 500,000 Israeli settlers in the occupied territories of the West Bank. And it's a really tiny area, it's really, and so the Palestinian population there is now about 2.5 million, maybe getting closer to 3 million. There's about 500,000 Israeli settlers, maybe it's a little less than that, I don't know. A lot of them, I don't know exactly how many, but many of them are what are called in Israel quality of life settlements. That is to say, they are usually situated very close to the Green Line, the old pre-1967 border. And they're inhabited usually by people who have no particular ideological commitment to the settlement enterprise. Usually these are just ordinary people who could not afford to buy a flat somewhere in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem or any of the cities. And so they came to live in these settlements which are over the Green Line, but very close to the Green Line, and where they had very substantial governmental subsidies. So they could actually buy a whole, little villa and live there. There are a lot of these people there, and they tend to work in the cities. They might work in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem or in Haifa or something. They commute back and forth. The distances are very, very short. Of course, there are big traffic jams now everywhere in Israel. Whole country's like a big traffic jam. But still, they commute every day back and forth, and they have these villas. Now, those, I don't know how many of them there are, but those people, in general, they're not the type of people who are going to engage in criminal violence against Palestinians. There are some exceptions to this generalization. For example, there's a settlement called Chalamish. Chalamish, right near a Palestinian village, big village called Nabi Saleh. I know the village. Chalamish, see, the trouble is, they're sitting on these Palestinian lands, right? And then they're taking over the fields, the Palestinian grazing grounds in their fields. And they'll also take over, let us say there's a well. A well is a big thing, and it really means a lot. You know? There was this, still is, this beautiful well at Nabi Saleh, where they used to water the flocks there, and they would swim there. And it was really important to the village, but the settlers just took it over. Even though they belonged to this relatively, I don't know what the word would be. I was going to say harmless, but it's not harmless. But they took the well, and they took the fields, and they've been also harassing these people in Nabi Saleh for the last, 30 years, I guess. Okay, then there's another category, the veteran settlements that are situated in the heart of the West Bank. And again, I don't know how many settlers we're talking about, but this is a different category of people. These are not people who came there because they wanted to buy a villa. These are people who come there with ideological commitment. They tend to be religious Jews who believe that their, the mitzvah, the commandment is to settle the territory and certainly not to allow anybody else to live there. And some of these settlements, veteran settlements that were established, most of them in the 80s, some in the 90s, even as late as the late 90s under Barak, during the Barak prime ministry. They are often very virulent and violent, and they love to harass Palestinian villagers, and they do their best to drive them out. I could tell you a lot of stories like that. Here's a good story. I'll tell you one short, and it's not even a whole story. One of the very worst of these settlements is in the northern part of the West Bank. It's called Itamar. The settlers there are notorious for their violent ways. A student of mine came to me. I don't talk politics in my classes at all. I accept the university rule that we're not supposed to do that in class, and so I don't talk about that. But people tend to know.
My dad, by the way, he's a professor of Indian studies. This is a whole side. He teaches Sanskrit and Tamil and Telugu and all this, and he's an India scholar. So when that's what he's talking about in his classes.
Sorry, I should have warned you that was the case, right? Okay. So one day, this young student came to me, a young woman, and she wanted to talk to me. I guess she knew that I'm active in the West Bank. Anyway, the people who are studying Sanskrit, they're a self-selecting group. They're all of them Gandhian pacifists or nonviolent, activists and vegetarians, and they do yoga and stuff. All of them are like that. Yeah, it's a very nice group actually, and they're also fantastic students, the best in the world, I can tell you. But anyway, this girl comes to me, this young woman comes to me, and she says, I just have to tell you something. I grew up in Itamar. That's this settlement, which is like so awful. Her parents, they moved there, and she was born there, and she grew up there. And she said, I grew up there, and at some point when I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, I realized that I could never, ever treat Palestinians, or for that matter, any human being, the way my parents and my neighbors and all the people around me had taught me to relate to Palestinians. So that's a good story, happy story. Sometimes there are really good things like that. Actually, we could spend the rest of this evening. I have a lot of good stories of people who crossed the lines, soldiers who, it's a complicated situation, as Misha said, and often ambiguous too, except that if you're like in the South Hebron Hills or in the Jordan Valley with the Palestinian shepherds, It doesn't look very ambiguous. I always used to say that ambiguity is the ground of our action. It's because of the ambiguity that we work. And because it means you have to take a stand and do the best you can under conditions that are often very complicated. But they're not so complicated in the South of everyone else. That's like a litmus test of what is human and what is inhuman. Okay, so you've got these veteran settlements. They're all over the place, and if you're a Palestinian villager living anywhere near any of these veteran settlements, the chances are very high that you will have been harassed and probably attacked and maybe arrested on, some trumped up charge and kept in jail for 2 or 3 years. And, I mean, all kinds of terrible things might happen. And if you ever want to, harvest your olive trees are really important. A lot of Palestinian families survive on olives, believe it or not. You want to harvest the olives, you can't do it unless Israeli activists are there to stand beside you and protect you from these settler terrorists. And even then, that's often not enough, because they'll come in, and a lot of us, all of us, we've all been attacked many times, sometimes very brutally attacked. There was something I wanted to say about that. Oh yeah, I wanted to say, so let me repeat. We're committed to nonviolent resistance. We learned how to do this on the job. And this man, Ezra Nawi, who was a very unusual person, he taught us also on the basis of his own experience. He never read a word by Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi or Mandela, nothing. He, on the basis of his own experience, he reinvented the whole business of nonviolent resistance. Actually, there are 2 films about Ezra. There's one called Citizen Nawi, N-A-W-I. It's a beautiful film. I recommend it. Anyway, so we're committed to that. So I'm in Susia, a month ago, or whatever it was, and I was talking to this friend of mine there. There's a poet. His name is Azam. He's a wonderful poet. He writes poetry in Bedouin dialect of Arabic. He's an older man. So we're talking. And he says to me, we're really glad that you're here. It means a lot, the support is all really important, but you're not really going to be able to protect us, he said, because you don't have weapons. Even if you had weapons, you wouldn't use them. And if they start beating you up, you don't fight back. That's what he said, So, and that's true. That's where we hold to that. We hold to those principles, and we know it's the only way, both in pragmatic terms, because if you do fight back, you're going to end up in a worse state than you were before, but also, and most important, on principle. Okay, so now we've had 2 categories. There are these, right? Okay, there's the quality of life settlements. There are these veteran settlements situated in the middle of the Palestinian territories. Yeah, okay, we'll stop in just a minute. But the most important category for the moment are these settlements that are called outposts, ma'achazim. This is a new tactic that the settler movement has adopted as a whole, and they're very upfront about it. They said, what they said years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, is that what we have to do is we have to set up these outposts, and we're going to have shepherds there, and they're going to have sheep and goats, and we're going to use the sheep and the goats in order to take over Palestinian grazing lands and agricultural lands. And that's what we see now. There must be at least 100 of these outposts. And they tend to be inhabited by relatively young guys, like I said before. I think they're often sort of troubled teenagers who don't really know what they're doing there, but they've been brainwashed. They are people who have found a kind of asylum in the settler movement, and they're religious. A certain kind of religiosity. I think it's a perversion of every value that the Jews ever had. but they're violent, and they're the ones who carry out these attacks, and they're also completely safe from any sanctions at all. They think that they're going to bring the Messiah, and it's going to happen soon. And in order for the Messiah to come, they have to rid the land of Israel of all non-Jews, but also preferably of all secular Jews. We're the enemy, along with Palestinians. We're like defiling the land, And they think the Messiah is going, as soon as the land is cleansed, then the Messiah is going to come. And he may come only after an apocalyptic war, and they like the idea. They're in favor of an apocalyptic war. And they're doing what they can to make it happen, and it may well happen in the territories. Okay, maybe I should stop here and we can get some questions.
On that happy note of the apocalypse, I'll put one question to you, Abba, and then I'll open it up. So I just want to clarify that so that we're all on the same page. Everything that David was just talking about, that all takes place in the West Bank. This is not in Israel proper. This is on Palestinian land. If you need to understand what this looks like, Google it. Google area A, area B, area C, Google what it looks like so that you understand it. And this is very different than the situation inside Israel. So I guess what I want to ask you on this question of the West Bank versus the rest of Israel and the fact of the occupation is do you blame the occupation for everything? Is it all a 67 thing? Is there other moments? Is it 48? How do you? Because I'm asking also personally because all of my work has always been anti-occupation work, and then now suddenly we find ourselves in a place where people are questioning the whole thing, and that shook me up a little bit.
It's not only the occupation, and we're not alone on the playing field. I mean, we have real enemies. Hamas are really terrible, horrible, inhuman, brutal enemies. And anybody who thinks, I don't suppose there's anybody in this room like this, but anybody who thinks, and there are people in New York who think, that what the Hamas did on the 7th of October was the work of Freedom Fridays. That's not true. There's no truth in that whatsoever. And if you hear people saying it, you should try to enlighten them if you can. So we have real enemies. And they're not our only enemies. We have the Hezbollah in the north, who are even more of a threat than the Hamas. And there's Iran. I mean, we could go on like that. So actually, a fundamental situation is that both sides routinely commit atrocities against one another. That's like one starting point. But if you're asking just about our side, what is our part in this whole thing? Then I think, yes, the occupation is the hard core of it all. I think so. It all goes back to that in one way or another. It's true that even before the occupation, before the Six-Day War, there were elements that were part of the Zionist reality in which, I don't know, terrible things happened. Terrible things were done. There was some kind of, I don't know what to call it. I don't like it when people say that Zionism was a colonializing movement, a colonial movement. It was maybe also something of that, but it was also much more than that. So I don't like to think of it as being purely some kind of, something like South Africa. It wasn't like that. And anybody, I went to live in Israel, the old Israel, before all of this happened, and it wasn't like the country that I'm living in today. It's the occupation and the settlement project that has ruined everything. We now have a situation where on the Palestinian side you've got these fundamentalist messianic types who want to institute Islamic state based entirely on Islamic law, and they're prepared to kill and to die for that. And on the Israeli side, we have these fundamentalist thugs in the outposts who also have an ideology like that. There was a very good essay about this in How, it's just 2 days ago, by somebody called Shul, who knows what he's talking about. And he says at the end of this essay, if we don't stop these people on both sides, then they're going to kill us all. They'll get us all killed. The trouble is, we now have a government in Israel which is committed to these people, including the prime minister. So it's a tough moment, really a tough moment.
Two questions. How does an activist like yourself stop the settlers, these violent settlers that you described, from not taking action because of your presence? What's going on?
That's the first question. You want to answer? The question was, how can people like me, the activists and all that, how can we actually stop the settlers when they come at us in very violent ways, which they often do. All of us have been through that. We can't stop them. We can't stop them. Our sheer presence, however, among these Palestinian villagers can sometimes serve as a kind of deterrent. The only weapon we have are our cell phones and our cameras. So actually they always go for the cameras. So if they can, they'll snatch the phones and the cameras and smash them, and all that, because they don't want their crimes to be documented.
They broke Yigal's, didn't
they broke Yigal, just 2 weeks ago they broke Yigal's camera. And it's the routine thing. They always try to smash the cameras. But if you're lucky, let's say that they don't actually manage to reach everyone. Let's say that there are 10 of us in a particular place. These nights in the South Hebron Hills, it's going to be like 3 or 4 of us in any given place. But let's say that there's one person who manages to photograph and send these, and actually the real trick that we've learned is that you have to do it on Facebook Live, because at least, it's there from the beginning. At least it may not last very long, but at least it's already going to be on Facebook, and you'll be able to see and to show something of the attack. So they're kind of afraid of the cameras, and our mere presence, I think, means to them, first of all, we are Jewish, although they hate us because we're traitors, but we are Jewish. It may sometimes moderate them to some extent, or hold them back a little bit. Last time I slept there, just a while ago, a couple weeks ago, I thought wrongly that the situation was maybe stabilizing a little bit. There were 2 or 3 days where there were very few attacks. And I thought that this had to do with the American pressure, because the Americans are very aware of what is happening in the territories. And I think there's really, major pressure, but it doesn't usually filter down to the grassroots level where we need it. Part of it was the fact that military people, really senior officers, people that had a career in the army, they're like at the top of the security echelons. We were able to reach a few of these people, and they understand it. The army, of course, could put an end to this thing if they wanted to. It's not. How many such settlers are there? Maybe they're 20,000, maybe they're 30,000, maybe they're 50,000. I don't know, but this is the army that defeated all the Arab armies. They could put an end to it if they wanted to. So if they have some really senior presence in the army, it's urging the present commanders to do something, that has some effect. And the third thing is our presence there, because somehow we call it protective presence, and indeed in some sense it does create a kind of thin veil of something that could be of use. Okay. Yeah, the second question.
Second and last question. I'm sort of a liberal Zionist. I criticize Messianic Zionism. According to the ADL, I'm an anti-Semite.
Right.
So let's talk about how labels by American establishment Jewish organizations are increasing the
Yeah.
pressure.
It's a real problem, and of course not only here. It's a real problem.
He wants
The question was about labels. Labels like liberal Zionists being called anti-Semites, for example.
So I'm not so conversant with this situation here. I see what I read in the newspapers. I know a little bit more about Germany. I'm in Germany usually every year, once at least, and I have a lot of colleagues and friends there. In Germany, this is like a really, really hot topic. You can kind of imagine what it would be like. You know? So there's a group of people, some of them friends of mine in Germany, who are desperately trying to insert into the public space the fact that you can be a critic of Israeli policy without being an anti-Semite. Maybe it looks obvious to everybody here, but there's a lot of people to whom it is not obvious, and the pro-Israel right is contributing to that. It's a real problem. I don't have any answer. I have to somehow try to maintain that distinction.
Yeah, Henry.
So I wanted to preface this question by saying I've been taking a class about Russia, and we've been talking about the polarization of politics and how that's affected our world, specifically in the U.S. and also how that's affected Russia. Anyways, you started to talk about the polarization of these two groups, and I wanted to ask you, is there any moderateness, right, other than you? And because it seems to me to be very two wide ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
So there's a question of whether there's some political force, let's call it, that is moderate in its opinions, and you're talking about Israel. You're not talking about what's happening on the Palestinian side. You know what, before we end, I have like a happy thought, which I'll share. But you're right, we're, activists, let's say, the actual activists who have hands-on work in the territories and are prepared to take the risks, because there are really solid risks now, serious risks. We're not so many. There are a lot of groups. I don't know, there must be 15 to 20 human rights and peace-oriented groups working in the territories at any moment, But a lot of them are the same people, the same small group, right? And so let's say these people who are now, that I said earlier, sleeping, every night in these villages, night and day, really. I don't know how many of us there are. There might be 30, let's say. But, it's a little misleading to think of it only in terms of the people who are actually there on the ground, because they're supported by a network in the cities. There has to be somebody at home who's going to try to call the press or call the police or whatever they're going to do. It doesn't usually help to call the police anymore, but still there has to be some kind of support system, and that's a larger group. And then there are wider concentric circles of people who actually more or less agree with our kind of view of the world. Maybe they think that somebody like me, they might think I'm like sort of way out on the extreme edge of the left, even though I think of myself as a very moderate person, actually. I'm extreme only in my moderation. But if you look at the wider picture in Israel, there are different ways to chop up the map, and we're not going to go into it now, but I think probably true to say that about half of the Israeli population is somewhere in the mainstream veering left. Half is not so bad. There's another way to say it, which might not look quite so good. But you know that before the war, there was this ongoing protest every week, and there were literally hundreds of thousands of people. There were nights where there were 1 million people out on the street. That's like the population of Israel is like 10 million people, right? So, yeah, there is, I think, a potential for support for a real moderate position, peace-oriented position. And I also think that on the Palestinian side, you could say something like that. Maybe not right at this moment, because the wartime. Some friend of mine who knows these things well. He said, opinion polls during wartime, you can just throw them in the wastebasket. They're useless. But when the war is over, I think that we'll see again the Palestinian mainstream, which is basically hopeful that there'll be some peaceful resolution.
I just want to reflect on your comment about some of the pressure, that positive pressure that may have occurred when there's any U.S. presence. And Misha and I have talked about this, just not about the West Bank specifically, but about the war. It's very hard as an American Jew to recognize that over the last 20 years we could have had much more impact. And please do not take my phone. Oh, sorry. Thank you, that's my child. But I do believe that we could have had much more impact, and I personally feel a sense of responsibility that I'd like to shift going forward. And so when I think about specifically this conversation tonight and these outposts and any kind of American influence or American Jewish influence that's not the Adelsons of the world, what can we do?
First, I'm happy to hear what you said. And, we've been longing for years for the American Jewish community to come through with the, what should I say, the classic Jewish values, however we want to define them. And we felt that there's been a tendency to line up behind the Israeli government no matter what the government is doing. What you can do right now, like the war is on. Well, I don't know what you can do right now. I don't know what I can do right now. I'm focused on these shepherds, tiny micro situations that I'm involved in. I'm doing whatever I can. And I'm trying to write about it also in public arenas so that people know what's happening and sort of understand that. That's one thing I can do. But the war will end. I think the present phase of the war, this really intense phase of the war, with all of the implications of that, it's likely to be over within the next, 3-4 weeks at most. That doesn't mean that everything's going to be just fine in Gaza. It's not, but I think that will be a moment where people who are prepared to argue for and push for some kind of rational, humane move, and I can tell you what I think that ought to be, you'll be able to make your voices heard. Even now, if you think that there should be a ceasefire immediately, you can call, you guys are living in a democracy, at least for the moment. You can call your representative, or you can write to the White House or the Foreign Act. I think people actually read those kinds of things. You can publish letters in the newspapers or opinion pieces in the newspaper. These are not trivial acts, and you never know. That's one thing I can say from long experience. You never know what the effect of a particular, even minor, moral act might be. Sometimes they reverberate in ways that you could just never believe, actually. I've seen it happen many times. So that's something that you can do, and you can organize, and there will be demonstrations and all of that. That's also, very important. Since you asked me that, though, let me just say something that might give people a little hope. And we can stop if you want, or we can go on, I don't know, it's up to you, but see, I'm accused sometimes by my activist friends of being an optimist, but actually I'm not an optimist. I'm not a true optimist. I have hope. There's a big difference between optimism and hope. Hope is a spiritual act. Optimism is a mentalistic, usually rather superficial kind of thing. But I have hope. So what would that hope look like? And listen, it's not a probabilistic kind of thing. You can't say that there's a 10% chance that this might happen. It's just, the world isn't like, the whole world actually, not a probabilistic world. I mean, there are areas where it is, like medicine, let us say, or all things like that, but okay, so a hopeful view would be, let's say that let's say that the Hamas is somehow out of the picture, removed from Gaza, or in the very least, defanged, disarmed. I don't know if that's an achievable goal or not. I don't know. But let's say maybe something like that happens. Then you'll have the American plan for the day after, which the Israeli government, certainly Netanyahu, will oppose tooth and nail. But what's the plan? The idea is that there'll be some kind of regional settlement in which there will also be room for a Palestinian settlement, maybe for a Palestinian state, or some other configuration that will mean that there will be some possible expression to the Palestinian national aspirations. Has to be something like that. And the moderate Arab countries like Egypt and Jordan and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Morocco and Tunisia and others will be part of this configuration, which will be some kind of major global settlement. Again, I want to say Netanyahu for sure, maybe most of the Israeli establishment will oppose it and do what they can to prevent it. And it's not much easier to prevent peace than to make peace, you know. But still, I think it could happen. I believe it's possible that something like this might happen. One of the reasons I say that is because I've been hearing from a good friend of mine who is extremely well informed. He knows everybody at the top echelons of the Israeli security establishment. These are the people in the Mossad and the military intelligence. He talks to them on the phone every day. He said to me, like a week ago, that he's now hearing from these people for the first time statements like, we just cannot go back to what we were doing before. We cannot go on with the occupation, the settlements, and all. And we cannot do it. We have to do something new. We have to do something different. And everybody knows what that something different should look like in broad strokes. You know? So that gives me hope.
So how about Bibi?
You know, first priority is to get rid of Bibi Netanyahu. So what I think is that as soon as the intense fighting is over and the reservists start coming back, there's going to be protests like we've never seen before in Israel. There'll be millions on this, I think. I could be wrong, but I think there'll be millions on the street. And in the end, that'll do it. I think so.
Yeah.
What you said, do you think Oslo is totally dead, or do you think elements resurrected from that?
The question is whether Oslo is completely dead or whether there are parts of Oslo that can be resurrected.
There were a lot of problems with Oslo, no question about that. But the underlying idea, the basic idea, I think was correct, and it's a simple idea in a way, even though the situation is enormously complex, right? But the basic idea is like there are these two peoples living in the same land, and there are two national movements, each one of which, you know, would prefer to be there alone and not to have to deal with the other. And probably each one of them would be prepared to go to great lengths to try to make that happen, that the other not be there. But nobody's going anywhere. I mean, there's going to be and that in a way that's the sort of primeval sin of the Zionist movement, was that it neglected to take this whole question seriously, of the fact that there were already people living there and they were going to fight back. So both sides, the simplicity of it is either these two peoples are going to kill one another, destroy everything, or they're going to find some way to live together. And I think we know what it would look like in broad strokes, what that living together might be like. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. And it's not going to be like Belgium or Switzerland or something like that. It won't be like that. And there will still be terrorists. It's going to be a lot, it's going to be messianic types roaming around on both sides. But if you could put in place a structure that would allow some basic kind of integrity to the idea that these two peoples were going to have to somehow live together and develop the mechanisms to do that, then maybe there'd be some kind of hope. I used to think I'd live to see it. I don't think so anymore, but I hope Misha will see it. Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to ask whether you could talk maybe a little bit about the communities that have been displaced.
Oh, yeah.
Where are they now? What are they doing in this work? And how are they helping?
Yeah, so the question is, it's a really important question. I had meant to say something about it earlier. Question is if I could say something about the Palestinian communities that have been displaced over the last few months. It was happening before the war, actually. I guess you know. Yeah. So, what we're seeing is, first of all, we're seeing a concerted effort by the outpost settlers to drive these people out. They think this is their grand opportunity under the veil of the war. They can do it. And they've been preparing for this for years. They wanted this, and this is what they want. So even before the war, there were a whole series of these villages that could no longer stand the constant harassment, which had become, enormously aggravated over the last year and a half or so. So I've seen some of those places. I was in a place called Ein Sami, a really beautiful village in the central West Bank. I was there on the day when the very last truck of these Palestinian villages, left the village with whatever they could salvage from it. We know at least for sure of about 16 villages that have been evacuated under these kinds of conditions, but I think there are probably more. It's more like 20 to 25. And there are cases also where individual families living in relatively isolated places pick up and leave because they can't stand it. They're just too vulnerable. But let's say there may be around 20 now. Where did they go? The question was where they go. Well, in Samia, for example, they moved into Area B. They moved into a hill. I was there, I saw them, I went to their new place with them. It's like an arid, stony hill in Area B. Did not look to me very promising in terms of grazing their sheep and goats, There was a green wadi valley down beneath them, but it belonged to some other villages, so I don't know, and I haven't been back there since then. But anyway, they chose that spot because it's in Area B. All of the settlements, basically all of the settlements are in Area C. That's 62% of the West Bank, and that's the part of the West Bank that the Israeli right wing wants to annex. So these people settled in Area B on this hilltop. It wasn't that far away from where they were living earlier. They were, of course, devastated by having to move. But I was not, and they chose that place because they thought in Area B they're going to be safe. There's not going to be a constant, harassment by these settlers. But actually, there are some very violent settlers not far away at all, like maybe 5 kilometers, and the settlers couldn't care less where the boundary of Area B is as opposed to Area C, and I'm not at all sure that they'll be safe there. Others from in Samia, they went the bulk of them went to this place, but some of them went to the Jordan Valley, especially the southern Jordan Valley, which has been a little less traumatized. I don't know, a little less. So some of them have moved to places like Uja in the Jordan Valley. And then some of them had, a lot of them have relatives. These are clans, tribes or clans usually. Some of them had relatives, other parts of the clan and other parts of the West Bank, so they've gone there. It's not impossible, I want to say that it's not impossible that we'll be able to bring these people back home. At least, people I hang out with, they haven't given up on that. And the Palestinians, although they've been deeply traumatized and they're afraid, there are, principle, in theory, it might, some of them would be happy to come back, I think, and we're very reluctant to leave in the first place. Yeah. So I don't know, like there's a lot of these villages, I don't know where every one of them has gone to, but I assume that quite a few have gone to Area B, if they could.
And what can we do was the other part of this is what can we do?
How can we help?
Oh, how can you help? Yeah, with that question. Gosh. First of all, it's really important to publicize the fact that this is happening. This is the beginning of a second Nakba. It's a small scale at the moment, but it's meant to become a mass movement, right? That's what the Saudis want. So it's really important to use the tools that you have at your disposal in a democracy. It's really, really important. If you want to contribute money to these people, and that's a possibility, there are channels that you can do that. There's a group, I'm on the, whatever you call it, the board of a group called Torat Tzedek. Torat Tzedek. Some of you know Arik Asherman, I suppose, who's the lead figure in this group. It's his group. So there's a tremendous need for more support from abroad. Tremendous need. You can imagine, just think of the legal expenses alone, you know, to say nothing of all kinds of other problems that are there, you know. So if you want to contribute money, that's important. The Ta'ayush group, my group, and you can contribute money on their website. We need it because just to take a group of, let's say, 10 or 15 activists down to the South Hebron Hills and back every, one time, that costs something like, I don't know, probably 1,500 shekels. That's maybe $400, you know, something like that. So we need money. We don't have a bank account. There's a good reason for that. But there is a way to contribute money to Ta'ayush on the website. And like that, there are like lots of other groups, you know, that need money. There are the Doctors for Human Rights. They're a tremendous group of people. You know, there's a lot. There's the Combatants for Peace, whom some of you may know. They're great. So yeah, there's a need for that kind of support for sure.
Torat Tzedek, the Torah of Justice. You can find them online, and they accept donations through NIF, the New Israel Fund. And Ta'ayush is Taayush. Ta'ayush.
Write this up.
We'll put it on the website. Ta'ayush. Sit down. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Toda Abba. Toda Abba. If this war has taught us anything, it's that we have to be able to contain more than one perspective. We have to be able to contain the difficulties on one side and the difficulties on the other side. We can't keep going with this false view of good versus bad. So if there's one thing you take away from that this evening, I hope you take away that the complexity and the real troubled difficulty of the Israeli situation and the Palestinian situation. So thank you all for coming to Darabah, and eat the grapes and drink the seltzer and hang out and ask my dad more questions, or see you guys soon. To Darabah.
Yeah, they're great. I don't know them very well, but I saw it was amazing what they had here in New York on Zoom. I saw. Did you see it? I thought, I mean, very, very, I like what they said. You said something about